G'day everyone and welcome to another episode of 2D3. I'm Major and today we're going to be going through the third installment of A Meta in Time. This one is the Nighthaunt edition as voted by you all on the 2D3 poll. I'd like to thank everyone for the feedback recently as well. Without you all I would be here forever trying to improve bit by bit and not getting very far. So if you have any more suggestions, I'm always open to a healthy dose of CNC. That being said, I do hope today is the day I earn your subscription. If you can, it would be great if you could hit the subscribe button, click on the bell too, and you'll be notified each time I drop a new episode. And if you have other friends in the hobby, please share the video as well. If you would like to know more about 2D3, head on over to facebook.com/2D3 and follow the page. You can also find me on the Twitters, tweeting, or whatever the cool kids are calling it these days. I'll leave links to the 2D3 social media in the description below as well. As always, links to the very handy AOS listbot site that I use for these Meta in Time episodes, AOS reminders, and anything else relevant to the episode will be down below as well. Today we take a look at what is, in the current meta, the wooden spoon holders within the Death Allegiance, but they look damn cool doing it. A storm of ethereal figures and eerie mist spreads before them, blotting out the sun. They muster upon the corpse-strewn battlefields or ancient burial grounds, a ghostly army of phantoms. They are the supernatural, the dead, the damned, the Nighthaunt. At least that's what their battle tome tells us. Before we get into it, I feel it's important to say that I like Nighthaunt. I have played Death since the inception of AOS and continue to today. Nagash and friends are my favourite theme throughout Warhammer and Age of Sigmar, so today's episode is one from someone with a love of the faction, but also I won't be putting lipstick on a pig. If you're looking for a Death army to get competitive with and your main priority is finance over function, then boy oh boy have I got the bargain for you. Nighthaunt are one of the strongest aesthetics in the Death Allegiance. You can buy the models for cheap all over the internet and in your local stores. For this reason, it's quick and easy to get into, and many of the units don't really require a creative arts degree to paint. But enough of those sprinkles really. Let's get into why you're here. So, ripping the hardest part off like a band-aid. Today we're looking at an army in the D tier. For competitive play, Nighthaunt is about as useful as a wet fart in public. I'm not saying it's uncool, I mean it's not very powerful in the current meta. With a win rate of about 40%, it has 3 current recorded event wins, which is about 1% of all events recorded. I will note that this is 1 more win than Sylvaneth and 2 more than Bone Splitters, but that doesn't feel as relevant as it should. If this hasn't shaken your resolve and you're still keen, then I think you're awesome, and let's continue. There are some units that you'll see in most lists, but it also isn't the largest faction in the game, so you aren't always spoiled for choice, especially if you're trying to build a competitive list. That's not to say you can't take what you like. The rule of cool always stands, nor does it mean that there is a severe lack of options. It's bang in the upper middle. Chainrasp hordes show up in 87% of lists and are S tier rated within this army. It's not a surprise considering their battle line, one of 4 battle line options this army enjoys. They are often chosen because they both meet the battle line requirements but are also cheap at 10 for 80 points with a blob of 40 only costing 280 with the horde discount. Squishy buggers are 1 wound per model with a 5 up ethereal save. Ethereal means it cannot be positively or negatively modified. For these and anything else with an ethereal save, they ignore Rend. This is one of the greatest things on offer for this army in my opinion. Not the unmodifiable save, the ignoring Rend part. But it also has a 6 up Deathless Spirit save. While a unit is near its general or a hero, as well as being able to benefit from the Shademist spell, which can make enemy units rolling for wounds against the Chainrasps subtract 1 from each roll, which can mean a lot when some random unit of elites were wounding on 3s but now on 4s, and your tar pit is now hanging around even longer. They fly, they reroll wounds of 1 when they are more than 10 in the unit, and their bravery goes from 6 to 10 so long as you pull the Dread Warden out of the unit last. They have the summonable keyword as well, so bringing dead dudes back and summoning from reserve is easy enough. That's dead dudes. When they die, they're dead dudes, I think. A unit of these coming up from the underworlds 9 inches from the enemy is a surefire way to force your opponent into having to make changes to their immediate turn strategy. They also benefit from the Wave of Terror allegiance ability, allowing them to fight at the end of a charge as well as in the combat phase if you roll a 10 or more on the charge. Doable, but far from guaranteed. You can also teleport the unit at the start of your movement phase back to your general side if you need to. 2 attacks each on 4s and 4s with no rend, 1 damage. These guys, if you're trying to take home the W, are mostly an auto-include when combined with our next cheery fellow. They're better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick for 80 points, but not my go-to for a real hammery unit compared to others we'll look at later. So that cheery fellow I mentioned, well, he's also the next most popular unit in recorded lists, the Guardian of Souls. Coming in at 78%, this bloke is a hero and a wizard with a single cast each turn. Your standard 5 wound hero on a 4-up, but his save's ethereal obviously. He has this handy lantern he carries around with him all the time like a weirdo, but it has the cool ability to add 1 to wound rolls to friendly nearby Nighthaunt units, within 9 inches but not wholly within. So now those Chainrasp hordes are hitting on 4s, wounding on 3s, which in a horde unit can make a lot of difference to how many save rolls an opponent will have to make. The added bonus, or perhaps the main reason to take this guy though, is the fact he brings back D6 wounds or models if no wounds are taken to a unit with the summonable keyword.
I'm gonna show you a little trick. Take your mind off that
Superbly average in combat with 3 attacks on 3s and 3s, rend 1 damage. At 130 points, I would say he's worth it, as in a game he could easily bring back or heal his points worth in models. Don't forget to keep him near a large unit though, to help keep him safe from sniping and things like that. A unit worth looking at is the Spirit Torment, which still has a consistent showing in list spot lists at 66%. It's not hard to see why. Another hero with flying that can deal D3 wounds or return models if 3 or more enemy models were slain in the turn, which is kind of meh. Unless you're up against Stormcast here, the D3 becomes a flat 3. But that's not why you take him. You're taking this bloke for the fact that those massive blobs of Chainrasp hordes are now able to reroll hits of 1 when this bloke's tagging along with them. Just remember it's wholly within 12 inches. As a smart opponent, we'll be watching out for that. This guy, along with the Guardian, means your hordes can now hit on 4-up, re-rolling 1s, and wound on 3s, as well as being able to bring back D6 plus D3. He isn't afraid to fight either with a 4-up ethereal save, 3 attacks on 4s and 3s, rend 2 D3 damage. Don't expect greatness at 120 points. He's more important to you alive and at the back of a unit than he is in combat, maybe getting 2 wounds on an enemy somewhere. The last popular unit is the Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed. He shows up in 54% of lists. As per the ghostly theme, the dude flies a course. At first glance he looks like a reasonable hero with 6 wounds, 4-up save, 12-inch movement. He has an interesting mechanic around his attacks, which can, when necessary, deal a bit of damage, but again, not why you take this model either. At 120 points, this guy's sole purpose on the table is to use his command ability. That unit of Chainrasps we were buffing earlier can now also do an extra attack, now doing 3 per model for the small cost of a command point. Just make sure the units you're doing this on are wholly within 18 inches, which is still a decent sized bubble. As you can see, there is a heavy reliance on synergies, and you're never guaranteed to get all of this off without a hitch. In the competitive scene, there is a lot of talented players who are quite capable of knocking a hero off the table with relative ease, so it always pays to have a backup plan. All of this sounds great in theory, however, in practice, Compared to other armies in the meta, and with the power creep enjoyed by some of the more recent armies, such as Lumineth Realm Lords, this army has a very hard time finding its feet. We'll look at a few more models in depth soon. For now, let's look at the army and its effective wounds grading. So this army has a much higher ranking in wounds, effective wounds, than the AOS average. It's coming in at a grade of a B. A lot of this is because of the cheap hordes you can throw down, but also the fact that the army's save rolls are non-modifiable. What that means is you can't buff their saves, but it also means your opponent cannot make it worse. And a 4-up is 50-50 shot, which is, still okay. And you've got the 6-up Deathless as well, which is where much of Nighthaunt will sit that 4-up ethereal save. The recovery of wounds and models means you can really get the most out of every wound in the army as well, which combines with all that I've mentioned to give this army a pretty decent grading here, really, overall. Casts and unbinds. A few single casting wizards and a Mortarch who can cast 2 spells means you aren't supreme in the magic game. Hell, you're not even good. Nevertheless, you do still have magic. The army's rank with it is just super crap at a D. Below the AOS average, to say the least. But that is not where the army is meant to shine anyway, so shrug this one off, be glad that your army has some super cool abilities to make up for its lack of casting a little bit, and move on. Your main caster is also a Mortarch, so let's take a quick look. Lady Olynder is despair given form. She exudes hopelessness and casts an enfeebling gloom upon her foes. Accompanied by Banshee handmaids, the Mortarch of Grief bears the life-taking staff of midnight, and horrors unknown lay beneath her veil. Basically, she has what I like to call small Mortarch syndrome. See, she is the smallest of the Mortarchs, which can sometimes show in how she plays on the table. Her Tinder profile states she's the mourning bride, the unrequited queen, the veiled lady, and the Mortarch of grief. She is despair made manifest, gloom given form, and in her abound all the sorrows and anguishes of the realms. Apparently she's so ugly under that veil that nobody has lived to tell the tale of what they have seen when she lifted it to them. She spent her mortal life pretending to be miserable and moaning about stuff all the time, so Nagash, being the fun-loving dude that he is, humorously gifted her the curse to feel every painful woe in all of the mortal realms, doomed to travel the worlds like a cranky teenager who just had her phone privileges revoked for a week. As cool a model as she undoubtedly is, many Nighthaunt players report that they find her underwhelming for her 200 point cost, which also makes her the cheapest Mortarch. If you like her enough to take her, like I do, probably don't worry too much about getting her into combat and focus more on using her as a support character, which is where she shines best. She is your only multiple caster, not including the Supreme Ruler of the Undead himself, and her command ability sees whole models returned at the cost of a CP, meaning you can bring back multi-wound models as well, so long as it has a summonable keyword such as your 2-wound Hexrays or even your 3-wound Spirit Hosts. Lady Olynder has a decent sized bag of tricks, and while she isn't a necessity, she is a nice to have oftentimes. She adds 1 to the number of models that flee from enemy units that fail a battle shock test while they are within 12 inches of her, and at the start of your shooting phase you roll 2d6 for each enemy unit within 10 inches of her. If the roll of the unit is higher than its bravery characteristic, it suffers d3 mortal wounds. This can be handy if you're already lowering a enemy unit's bravery already. Once per battle in your hero phase, you can choose either to inflict d6 mortal wounds on an enemy hero within 6 inches of Lady Olynder, or heal d6 wounds that have been allocated to her in case she has bitten off more than she can chew in a battle somewhere. At the start of each of your hero phases, you can pick an enemy unit within 12 inches of her, so long as it is within her line of sight, and roll a dice. On a 2-up, that unit suffers a number of mortal wounds equal to the roll And on top of that, if any enemy models are slain by this ability, immediately heal D3 wounds that have been allocated to her. While she is a double caster, her only War Scroll spell allows you to, on a 7-up, pick an enemy unit that is within 18 inches of Lady Olynder and within her line of sight. Until your next hero phase, you subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by the enemy unit, and add 1 to hit rolls for attacks made with melee weapons that target that unit. That is melee attacks from any of your forces that target that unit. This can be handy. Shooting damage also comes in at a grade of a D. Why so low? Well, that's simply because this army sucks at shooting. A black coach with an which is an absolutely awesome model, has a shooting attack. Great Rend, poop range, poop damage. We'll look at it more later. The Kurdos Cruciator has a shooting attack. Great Rend, poop range, poop damage. We might glance over him later. Probably not though. Chainrasps have a shooting attack. Rend is good, poop attacks, poop damage. You kind of get the theme here though, right? So don't lean into shooting if you want to play Nighthaunt is the lesson here, kids. In saying that, you're playing a death army anyway, and let's face it, other than specific lists in OBR, death aren't known for their shooting at all. Overall damage, a grade of a B-. This means this army just sneaks past AOS average, which is decent enough. You have some mortal wound output sprinkled around the army, some cool abilities such as the ones found on the Black Coach War Scroll. You don't see many lists running multiples of these guys because they are expensive in both points and dollary dues. But once again, the rule of cool. A lot of the models in this army all have Rend, with Rend 1 and 2 not uncommon across much of the faction. Grimghast Reapers have a cool ability called For Whom the Bell Tolls, where once you've allocated wounds from the leader of the unit, if anything dies, you allocate a mortal wound for each model that was slain. Great versus scores of small rats, etc., but nothing game-changingly good. What I'm getting at is there are plenty of little gems like that scattered amongst the army that, when combined with its staying power, decent rend, and bonuses such as those already discussed, give this slightly higher than average grade. Objective control, B- as well, which again is slightly higher than the AOS average, but not enough to be noticeable. Your objective control really comes from your ability to throw hordes of regenerative hordes and to teleport across the table to your general on a point, etc. Once a unit of 40 Chainrasp on a point, that point is yours for a long while. You also have a few units such as the Grimghast Reapers and especially Hexwraiths with decent mobility to get you to those points first when needed. Speaking of which, let's actually look at those two. So the Grimghast Reapers have a movement of 8, but once you run them, they're getting anywhere on your side to the middle of the table in the first turn, so long as you don't deploy like a pleb. We already mentioned the Slasher Scythe earlier, but the rest of these guys are also putting in some decent hits with 2 attacks each, hitting and wounding on 3s, Rend 1, and 2 damage a pop. I'll show you a cool way to increase their attack numbers soon too. These also have all the keyword requirements for the buffs we discussed earlier, so it's simple enough to have them wounding on 2 up, thanks to the Guardian of Souls, and hitting on 3s, re-rolling 1s, thanks to the Spirit Torment. These come in units of 10 for 160 points, but max out at 30 for 420. Hexwraiths are your standard ghastly cavalry with a twist. I personally always turn mine into Black Knights, but that's neither here nor there. It flies, it has the unmodifiable save of a 4-up again, so much of the same there, but its base move is 12 inches. But where these guys get funky is its Spectral Hunter's ability. Basically, they do hurdy things in the movement phase. The goal is to move your Hexwraiths, or run them straight over the enemy unit, which then does mortals to them. Then you charge and pile in and do more there too. Then in your next movement phase, you can retreat back over the enemy and do more mortals as you wave goodbye. Situational, perhaps doable? Well, yes, it is. And not as hard as you might initially think when you remember the decent movement profile they have. After that though, the fun stops. They are 2 wounds a pop, and unless you keep them in range of all the earlier mentioned buffs, they tend to not do the damage you would hope for a lot of the time. Still okay at 130 points for 5, mind you. Mobility. Nighthaunt gets better than average grade for mobility, albeit slight. You're not moving as slow as other armies with the lowest movement in the army coming in at 6 inches, with others reaching the 10 and 12 inch mark. It's simple enough to teleport entire hordes of units across the table using the Spectral Summons command ability, which lets you, in your movement phases, pick a Nighthaunt model and teleport, a Nighthaunt unit and teleport it anywhere on the table wholly within 12 inches of your general, so long as it's 9 inches or more away from enemy models. Plus, this army has a decent deep strike ability in its form of the from the underworlds they come allegiance ability. What this allows you to do is not place units you choose that have the Nighthaunt keyword onto the table in the deployment phase. Instead, you leave it off to the side and say that it's set up in the underworlds as a reserve unit. For every 1 unit you place on the table, you can place 1 in reserve this way. Then at the end of one of your movement phases, you can bring them up from the underworlds anywhere on the table, so long as they're at least 9 inches away from enemy models. Just be sure you get it done by the end of the movement phase in turn 3, or whatever is left there stays dead. There is also a handy artifact that can help boost movement further that I'll discuss shortly. To top off this army, I mentioned earlier that the Chainrasps hordes are an S tier model within the army. There is one other which you won't see as often, and that's the Bladegeist Revenants. Who cares about their war scroll, basically? I love these guys. It's like a Nazgul from Lord of the Rings and a Dementor from Harry Potter had a love child. 1 wound models with an 8-inch move and a good ethereal save sounds average enough, but they have all of the right keywords to benefit from the buffs we've been discussing. Plus, it's even easier to get a blob of these guys re-rolling all failed hits with its Fearful Frenzy ability, which states that you can re-roll failed hit rolls. So all failed hit rolls, not just ones. If this unit is wholly within 12 inches of a Spirit Torment, which you would want usually anyway, or failing that, same thing but within 12 inches of Chainrasps. Handy, certainly. It gets better too. The unit can also retreat and charge in the same turn thanks to its Whirling Death ability, which also gives each model an extra attack if they charged in the same turn. They already get 2 attacks each, and it's not difficult to get these guys with 3 attacks each, hitting on 3s, re-rolling all fails, wounding on 2s, Rend 1 damage. Math hammer it and you'll see these guys aren't bad for their points level, costing 90 for 5 and maxing out at 20 for 320. You may be wondering why I haven't focused more on the Black Coach, arguably one of the coolest models in the army and a hell of an improvement over its old variant, which was in desperate need of an update. Yes, the model is amazing and I have seen multiples of them taken in a single list before, but they don't tend to help out as much as you would like them to in the current meta, which sees them get a grading within this army of a B. Don't let the rather large war scroll put you off though. Much of it is designed to benefit itself or other coaches more so than anything else. It can throw out some extra slain model resurrection, which is nice, and it's easier to get all of the benefits these have to offer if you have multiples, which can also be an issue when the model itself will set you back $203 dues in Australia and 220 points each in your list. It's fast and packs a punch, but the D3 damage characteristics can be off-putting as you basically look at that half the time and just see a 1. Its primary weapon, the Reaper Scythe, has the unlikely potential of causing 6 straight mortals without rolling a wound. If you manage to roll 3 6s, that is to hit, but if you did that, I'd also suggest you also go out and buy a lotto ticket just to be sure. For anyone who has played with the 3 OG Mortarchs or Nagash, you'll recognise the Spectral Claws rule, where the attacks score a mortal wound on the hit roll of a 6. As it is a 12 wound model, there is of course the saddening presence of a damage table. which impacts its movement and to a lesser impact its Spectral Claws attacks. These are great to get up the table quickly, so movement hindrance can be bothersome. You notice fairly quickly the large amount of text for its Evocation of Death ability, which sees you rolling 3 dice for every coach you have on the table. When you roll those dice, each 4-up gives it a level of power. This means if you have 3 on the table, you're rolling 9 dice for each coach. Once the coaches reach a power level, they keep it for the rest of the game. In order, these allow you to return D3 slain models to the summonable Nighthaunt unit that you've picked. Reroll failed hits for the coach and allows run and charge in the same turn. Then after that is dish out D3 mortals, then retreat and charge in the same turn, and finally another set of D3 mortals to dish out. Overall, its War Scroll shows a decent unit, but when there are better ways to spend those 220 points, it becomes less prevalent in the current meta unless you really want to run these in groups of 2 or 3 for the lols. All that said, I would highly recommend any Nighthaunt player get one of these if they can, because they are great looking, fun to paint and kit bash, and are still fun in casual games, and it can still bring the pain, just don't expect it to work out for you all the time. Another honourable mention is, of course, Kurdos Valentian, the Craven King. A kick-ass model, and he has some of the funniest lore that shows the morbid humour of Nagash as well, and by the manner of their death shall ye know them. Basically, after Nagash made Lady Olynder, he needed to hook her up with a decent lieutenant and decided old mate here as a good choice as any. When he still lived, he was basically an asshole who did anything for power, including killing his own brothers. He wanted to rule all he could. Nagash wasn't a fan of him because his family worshipped Nagash, but Kurdos worshipped Sigmar. Just as Kurdos managed to cheat, steal, and kill his way to ruling, Nagash took his soul, where, again, as a spirit, he tried to do the same thing. Nagash had a laugh and decided to more or less betroth Kurdos to Lady Olynder, to forever do her bidding. So, now he floats around on the throne he coveted so much when he was alive, but he'll always be number 2. He's followed around for all eternity by 2 blokes he had killed back in the days he was still seeking power, and they forever introduce him by pointing out all the shitty things he did to land himself in the position he's in for all eternity. You know, here approaches Kurdos, false lord of nothing, murderer of kin, douchebag of the highest order, and Craven King. Another part of his curse means he can only ever talk in graspy whispers, which is very unkingly. Basically, he's doomed to float around grinding his ethereal teeth and STFU forever and ever. His claim to fame is his thematically named ability, If I Cannot Rule, None Shall Rule, which sees you pinching your opponent's command point on a 5-up when they receive it at the start of each of their hero phases. If you do have him and you are taking him, don't forget, if your opponent wins the toss and goes first, you can still use this. Most of his rules would incentivize you to go target other people's generals with him, which is okay in some scenarios, as he can deal a bit of damage with his scepter. It's damage going from D3 to D6 on the wound roll of a 6, and you can reroll fail hits for his weapon if you're targeting an enemy general. That said, he isn't going toe-to-toe with the likes of more god-level generals, and coming out better off for it on a 4-up ethereal save with only 7 wounds. He also has the same Spectral Claws rules as we see on the other heroes such as the Mortarks. If you're looking for a good list to run that might allow you to pinch a few wins, you could try spending your 2k on the following list maybe. So first up, Guardian of Souls with Nightmare Lantern as your general. Take the Ruler of Spirit Host command trait so that you can pick a friendly summonable Nighthaunt unit at the start of your hero phase within 9 inches of old mate and return D3 slain models to that unit. Not wounds, models. He will do well with the Pendant of the Fell Wind artifact, as this will add 3 inches to normal moves made by any friendly Nighthaunt units that are wholly within 12 inches of him at the start of their movement. Midnight Tome can also be useful, but not necessary, as even with this slight improvement, as far as casting goes, the army is still lackluster, to say the least. So stick with what's good, and further boost movement, really. Give him the Soul Cage spell from the Law of the Underworlds. This will, on a 6 or more, let you pick an enemy unit within 12 inches of Guardian so long as it's within line of sight, and render it unable to retreat until your next hero phase, as well as forcing it to fight last until your next hero phase. While the no retreating bit is as helpful as clapping with crap in your hands, the fighting last bit is great. After him is Spirit Torment, for the obvious reasons I've already mentioned, plus he looks cool. Lady Olynder, because she is already pissed off enough, no point making her angrier by not inviting her to the party, right? Seeming as she is there, and seeming as she casts spells, give her the Shade Mist spell from the Law of the Underworld, so that each of your turns on a 6-up, you can select a Nighthaunt unit from your army wholly within 12 inches of her, so long as they are within line of sight. And then until your next hero phase, your opponent must subtract 1 from wound rolls that target that chosen unit. Now, while none of the lore spells are amazingly, life-changingly, cosmically amazables, they are okay, and this is an okay spell. You know you can't buff your saves, so little trinkets like this help make up for that, and it also helps with Lady Olynder's supportive role-like theme we have going on with her anyway. Throw in Reikenor the Grimhaler for good measure with the Spectral Tether spell from Law of the Underworlds. So you can pick a friendly Nighthaunt hero within 12 inches of him and heal D3 wounds to it. He will be handy for an extra shot at an unbind if you need to, plus he has a handy way of making his spell easy to cast, which could see an enemy unit cop 2 D3 mortals, so as in 2 times D3 mortals. For the last hero, you'll have to bear with me here. Seriously. Add a Vampire Lord on Nightmare Mount for 140 points and ally him in. I know, don't hiss curses at me for breaking aesthetics here. This is a competitive list, not a pretty one. Keep this guy near your big blocks of units or battle line, or anything you want to be doing a bunch of fighting with. Its command ability lets you make a unit of your choice, so long as it has the death keyword. Make an extra attack with its melee weapons. That makes units like your Bladegeist Revenants or your Grimghast Reapers pump out some serious attacks. He also adds even more healing or return slain models, because despite the fact he is from a different army, the keyword he needs is summonable, which you'll find plenty of in Nighthaunt. On his mount, he can also keep up with mostly anything you have in your army, which is good because you want to keep that bubble close enough to maintain its benefits. For 140 points, he is doing you a favor, that's for sure. Battle line requirements, they need to be met. Throw in 4 of 10 Chainrasp Horde units. Cheap chaff that can be mobile, replenishable, teleportable, and gives you numbers on objectives when you need it. A unit of 30 Grimghast Reapers. Like I mentioned earlier, these guys are not bad at all, and they love buffs. Plus, with the Vampire Lord, you now have them on 3 attacks each, with all the other goodies I've mentioned. This unit is Beast Mode Nighthaunt when used correctly, same as the next unit in the list. Throw in a unit of 10 Bladegeist Revenants. Using the buffs in the army and the Vampire Lord, you can get these guys to 4 attacks off the back of a charge, hitting on 3s, rerolling fails, wounding on 2s. This means your opponent will have to respect that unit as a very real threat. Top the list off with 12 Miremorn Banshees for good measure. I mean, they aren't that expensive at 70 points for 4, so 210 for the 12 in this list. They can unbind a spell for free in each enemy hero phase, and for every 4 models in that unit, remember we're talking a unit of 12 here, you add 1 to that unbind roll. Then if you unbind that spell, you get to add 1 to its attacks. It then has all the right keywords as well, should you wish to apply all of the buffs we discussed earlier, thus meaning you can get these lovely ladies on 3 attacks each, hitting on 4s, rerolling, wounding on 2s, Rend 2 D3 damage. They can dish it out when needed, that's for sure, and have a decent movement at 8 inches with an ethereal 4-up save, of course, and then a deathless one. You still have 110 points left over. The army has its own endless spells in the battle tome, and sure, they seem okay. In my opinion, they're more meh than okay. So take Chronomatic Cogs and Geminids, bringing your total to 1990. Cogs will allow you to give your units a speed boost, increasing your move and charge by 2, or slowing your opponent down if necessary. Board control is still highly important in the meta, so these can help you out more than we often give credit for. Geminids gives you more mortal wound output, removes potential attacks against your units, and or makes them harder to hit. This is useful in an army where you aren't really ever increasing your save roll from a 4-up, basically, other than utilizing Mystic Shield. It can also turn an opponent's hammer into more of like a heavy stick. The catch, well, you gotta get the casts off first to use them, but chances are still reasonable to okay. That's the list, but it's by no means your only option, and there are plenty of others out there. There are also quite a few other models I haven't covered in this episode. Along with the Guardian of Souls and Spirit Torment, many people would also say the Dreadblade Harrow are an auto-include, along with the Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed. Yes. Probably yes. I'll leave a link to a really informative video from Age of Nagash. He looks at those two a bit more than I have, and that may have you feeling more compelled than I am to take them, because they are decent. So there'll be a link for that in the description below. So if Nighthaunt is your thing and you're taking a list to your next event or games night, what should you expect? Well, Nighthaunt earn their wins that they get, that's for sure. Surprisingly, Nighthaunt's best win rate is against an army from all the way up in S tier, the Seraphon, coming in at 63% over 11 recorded matches, with win rates against the Gits and Ogre Maw tribes in the 50th percentiles as well. The army seems to struggle greatly against OBR, Ironjaws and Flesh Eater Courts, more than any others, with win rates all under, say, 20% and as low as 16%. You'll also struggle against Daughters of Cain, Hedon Knights and Stormcast Eternals, but you can manage easier against Nurgle and Blades of Corn a little. So if you have these models or are wanting to get into the army, I can, in my humbly unqualified opinion, suggest the list that we've just gone over, or a variant of it. While this army is currently mathematically one of the weakest armies in Age of Sigmar, within the competitive meta, it's still out there waiting for a touch from GW's Power Creep Wand, and who knows what their next book might bring, really. So I'll leave it there for today, but if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you want to correct something that I've stuffed up along the way here today, please feel free to drop it in the comments below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. I do really appreciate any feedback that I can get. But that's it for today, guys, so thank you very much, take care, and I'll see you guys next time.